Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to another amazing Saturday session, the Q&A session for Surah Al Nisa, our day 12, which is absolutely amazing. I first want to pray that you forgive me if my fasting brain takes over, because fasting brain is a real thing. It's alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, for Ramadan, so many beautiful blessings, but one of them is just feeling like sometimes you can't quite get the thought you want to make. And also, I'm a little bit emotional. Today is Mito of Bob and Mito's 17th birthday. So I've been so sentimental the last night just thinking about, gosh, 17 years ago right now, I would have been, like Mito was just out of my body. And, it's like these things are so precious. I mean, they're so important because you recognize how quickly time flies and how much life changes and how much you have to be grateful for. And then also, in our times, you start thinking about what it's like for so many children around the world who are suffering, so many Muslim families who are in places where they don't have a normal upbringing. And so you feel so grateful. And, obviously so much of what we do here in our hope is to leave something behind for our kids, for future generations. So, part of me wanting to mention this is in the hopes that one day Mito will watch this and go, oh my God, that was so embarrassing, Mom, you mentioned my birthday on this day. But, this is an important education, and I hope that this is something that many young people will watch and gain from. And, we got this, we are subscribed to, I think we've mentioned it before, if Americans knew, I think it's Allison Weir, who sent an email right before we started, and I wanted to mention it because she has this incredible statistic that 53,000 Palestinian children have been detained by Israel since 1967, and that is just a stunning number. And I pray, inshallah, that, so much of what we talk about here is about knowledge and empowerment and how to make a change. There's just so much that we have to do for the disempowered. And certainly talking about Surah Nisa, that's the theme, is how do you empower the disempowered? And, I hope, and these last khutbahs, even, for example, that Sheikh has been giving, have all been really fundamental and foundational in just like turning inward and thinking about how can we ourselves make a change that will begin, hopefully, the process of changing something much bigger. And in that spirit, I thought I would share in this introduction a really important story that developed this week. If you haven't had time to follow this, I just wanted to bring it to your attention. It's in the spirit of empowering the disempowered. You may have heard that Amazon, there have been a group of people that have been organizing and trying to create a union in Amazon. And finally this week, there was a group that actually succeeded in getting a vote to create a union. And this is a huge David and Goliath story because, Amazon is the number 2 employer in the country after Walmart. And Jeff Bezos is obviously one of the richest people in the country. And we all know that working conditions for people working at Amazon is brutal. It's horrible. And really, you can just look up, there's just so many countless stories that they don't even have time, to go to the bathroom. But so it's a classic situation where you have really disempowered workers up against a giant. So this is an incredible case study. I hadn't really been following it, and I just started to watch, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is truly stunning because they can actually, it's very historic, the fact that they were able to agree to a union. And the points that I wanted to make is that this was something that was truly like a grassroots effort. I don't know much about unions, so I'm just going to share with you from a layman's perspective what I understand took place. So right when COVID hit, Amazon did not take any precautions, did not care about worker conditions. And so workers were left without any PPE, no social distancing, people were getting sick. One of the people who now is the interim president of the union, his name is Christian Smalls, noticed that every day he would go to work and he would notice that people were just mysteriously getting ill and that Amazon was lying and misrepresenting what they were doing to protect their workers, but obviously they were not doing any of those things. And so he felt, I need to stand up and do the right thing. And so he brought it to the management's attention. He encouraged his fellow workers to do a walkout. And so Amazon responded by quarantining just him alone. So they felt that that was the best way to silence his voice and continue on with what they were doing. Eventually, he was fired, and he recognized that this quarantining of him was a way to just get him out of the picture. And then he lost his job. And then his best friend, who was a partner with him in this unionization movement, was still working at Amazon. So what eventually they decided to do is continue in, thinking about what can we do to stand up for our rights. Amazon, meanwhile, identified Christian Smalls. Like, if you look at him, I think he was a rapper. He's an African-American person. They decided to make him the face of the union movement so that they could basically kill the union movement, because they actually described him as stupid and inarticulate. And so when he heard that, that fired him up, obviously. He had no intention of being the head of a movement. He had no intention of starting a grassroots unionization effort, but that's eventually what he did. He decided to fight back. And it was over the course of 11 months, he and his friend, made an active effort to reach out to people, to talk to them. Like, they really didn't even know. Like, if you listen to some of the interviews, and it's easy to find him, he says, we had no idea what we were even trying to do. We just felt we needed to do what was right and stand up for our rights. And this became a battle. And ultimately, Amazon spent over $4 million trying to undo this effort. And for them, like, a Christian would be basically at the bus stop talking to people as they were arriving to work, and his best friend would be inside, still working, in the Amazon warehouse, talking to people, meanwhile trying to convince them to join this effort. And together, they were able to succeed. And so this past week, they took a historic vote, and it was okay. But here's what's really interesting about it. One is that, this is like, as far as, like, I don't know anything about unions, and I guess if you wanted to start a union movement, you could work with an established union, like, organization to help you unionize. And that's what actually another Amazon location did. These guys decided to just create something from scratch because they knew the ins and outs of what workers wanted and needed, because they were workers there for many, many years. So they, started this journey inventing something, and of course received a lot of, criticism and, like, just basically, oh, you're not gonna win. So they went ahead anyway. And if you think about the workers at Amazon, they cross every single ethnic group, every single age group, every single, situation, languages. You had to cross a lot of different types of ethnicities, language, orientations, whether they're, more conservative or right-wing. I mean, it's like a cross-section of the working class in America. And yet you had to somehow convince all of these people to come together because, over a shared humanity, right? So people were getting really just traumatized and mistreated. And what's fascinating is, as I learned more, I got very interested in this story, and discovered that part of, like, what they did to talk to people and convince them is they started having, like, even food gatherings, right, where they would bring people together over, cultural and food, but they would also just talk about, like, okay, their rights and what, what is necessary from a humanistic perspective. So, for us as Muslims, it's a really interesting idea because we also, as Muslims, cross the entire gamut of, different views, ethnicities, languages, ages, and all of this sort of thing. And it's like a lesson for us to think about, if we wanted to change something, what can we learn from this situation? Furthermore, from another angle, I was listening to some commentary about this from, actually one of my favorite people that I mention a lot, named Crystal Ball. And she was saying how this is really an era changer, because we live in a time, and as Sheikh has mentioned definitely in khutbahs, how everything is commodified, and we live in this era where, market value is what really reigns. A human being's worth is driven by either how much they can produce monetarily or how much they consume. And that they are not at all interested, the corporations are not at all interested in humanistic issues. And Crystal Ball talks about how this is a whole neoliberal movement in which it was, a world designed by Democratic and Republican neoliberals that is really gamed to just increase profit. And so by definition, part of that was also busting unions, part of that whole drive to, focus on profits. And so as you see, like, the history of politics, as this focus on profitability went up, so did union membership and, efforts to bust unions. So the fact that we actually have a story where a union now can stand up and, now they actually have to reckon with and recognize someone named Christian Smalls, who is African American and appears to them so foreign, but is now so powerful because now he is wielding actually power. This is a way that the disempowered can fight back, because now they're speaking money. And what's fascinating is because this movement was started without the help of anyone. That's totally grassroots, and they literally raised $100,000 to defeat the $4 million investment that Amazon made. He's a free man, and he can just speak what truth to power. He can just stand up for the rights of the people that he represents, and it's like 8,500 workers at Amazon. But since he actually, since they won this effort, every single union or, people at Starbucks, people at Amazons across the country, people at Walmart have been reaching out to him, and he's offering to teach people what they need to do. And the ethic is, don't leave your job if you're unhappy, organize, because the power of people coming together can actually win. And what's exciting about this is now, this is one Amazon warehouse, but now it can replicate to so many other, right? If Amazon is so powerful and now you have a union movement all throughout, that is a very fast way that the shift can change in power. So, I mean, this is, to me, from a Muslim perspective, what we've been talking about here is so exciting, because, when you're in this Islamophobic world where everything is so dark for Muslims, and you wonder, okay, what can change? These are examples. These are signs that God gives us, that things can change if you do the work, if you, really focus on what's right, if you, organize, there's always the power for change. And I believe that, if these people are fighting for justice, God obviously helped them, uplift this effort. So it just dovetails so nicely with everything else that we've been talking about. So I just wanted to share that, and I want to just encourage you, if you haven't taken time to follow this story, it's really worth your time to just know more about it. It's really inspiring, but it's also a really important lesson for us as Muslims in our world. So thank you for that. And I actually wanted to, again, call attention to the power of yesterday's khutbah, which was really amazing. Just to start off again, we've just had so many incredible khutbahs in a row. But, again, the key idea yesterday is this idea that fasting and that, learning the art of drawing close to God through denial. So many of us think in terms of a relationship with God, in terms of what are we getting? We're doing okay if God gives us what we want. But as soon as we don't get what we want, or we're disappointed, or something bad happens, then because our faith is tied to that, our faith gets weakened. So when God doesn't give us what we want, then our faith is weakened, which is really the wrong way of looking at things. And so it's a really, really powerful khutbah. Again, I really encourage you to do that. And I thought to start off with our Q&A session today, I actually have, I've gotten actually a lot of email about yesterday's khutbah, which is really wonderful. It really touched a lot of people. And there was someone who asked a question. I thought we could just kick off with that before we jump into Surah Nisa. So first question, I wanted to ask, Sheikh talked about gratitude and our intentions of relating to God with regard to our desires. There's a conversation I've had with friends that I would love the Sheikh's thoughts on. In simplest terms, is it arrogant to ask God for something, even non-material, like marriage or health, etc.? Does that imply that we know what's best for us, or for whom we're asking, more than God does? I'm a teacher, and another teacher friend related this with the analogy, don't you want your students to advocate for themselves? What better feeling is there than that? I agree, but also I am not omniscient, and I did not create my students, so I'm not sure the analogy goes that far. Obviously, there is a tradition of making dua in Islam, but I find myself uncomfortable with anything besides prayers of gratitude. I would love any thoughts on this. Do you want to keep this?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وتابعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب العالمين. Um, there is actually a hadith that in which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to say that ask God for what you want, but ultimately accept what God gives you, or what ultimately accept what God wants. So, where and it is even the Prophet ﷺ, when we have these reports of battles or where or even outside the country where the Prophet ﷺ is doing dua for victory, or doing dua that or does dua or that certain individuals become Muslim, or even if you study the dua of the Prophet ﷺ himself, I mean, it always follows a pattern. He articulates what he desires for himself, for the ummah, for his family, but at the same time also articulates that he is accepting whatever Allah wills. And that is the proper form. Yeah, you do want it is to simply do dua, for instance, and say, Allah, do whatever you want. Um, some have said that this lacks adab towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although, I mean, yeah, I've read both ways. But anyway, the 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 point is that who are you to tell Allah to do whatever Allah wants? You know, the point is not for you to so to speak give permission for God to do whatever God wants, but for you to sincerely, and Allah knows what's in your heart, whether you articulate it or you don't articulate it, that although you are investing your energy and your thought and your spirit in trying to think carefully about what is the path in life that you wish to take, um, but that, and so you articulate it, and you believe that if Allah wills it for you, Allah can make it happen for you, but at the same time that you are, when all said and done, you will accept Allah's will, um, with full rida, with full um, acceptance, that you ultimately, and that's an inner state. I mean, I know that people who I've known a lot of people who have grown so in their path with Allah that they've grown so close that they no longer ask for anything. Um, so if they ask, a lot of times they'll ask for others, but not for themselves. But this is not because there's a subtle distinction here. It's not because they are not um, it is not because that their attitude is, I'm not going to bother asking for anything because I believe that just Allah give me whatever you want. Um, Rather, they truly, for certain group of people, the their relationship to dunya, their relationship to, so all they want from Allah is forgiveness and a closer relationship. And so the affirmative dua that they articulate has to do with non-material things. It has to do with taqwa and iman, and they just, dunya has become unimportant in there, so they don't even bother asking um, for dunyawi things or earthly things, and that's different. If again, it, make your relationship with Allah a truthful relationship. Allah knows what's in your heart, and when you pretend to be what you're not, the lack of truthfulness, and lack of transparency will ultimately damage your relationship with Allah. It will not help. The thing that helps the most is that if you ultimately want to reach that point where dunya doesn't occupy your heart, and so you, you just don't, it's like whether you make money or you don't make money, it's all the same to you. Then make that the truth of your heart. Don't, it's not a matter of, well, let me pretend like I don't care about things, and let me just put on an act of, well, Allah give me whatever you want, and it 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 reflect, learn to be truthful with yourself, transparent with yourself, and that transparency and truthfulness will often be the best corrective to your relationship with your maker, because you will not allow for any um, deception or lack of truth to or affectations, or the displays of false anything to enter in your relationship with Allah. Did that answer it?
I think so. Yes, absolutely. And I was waiting for you to say what Mama would always say.
I didn't want to.
Okay, I'll say it. I mean, honestly, like one of the things that was so valuable that I've learned from Sheikh and from his mom and from the family is just to always ask for whatever is best. And only Allah knows what's best. And then just to trust that Allah will give you what is best for you. It may not be something that you want, may not be something that you like. It might be difficult.
The reason I didn't say my mother's example is that that was truly what was in her heart. For her, I know for a fact that she reached the point. She wasn't born this way. I mean, and I can testify that I've seen her in various stages in life, but the point where grace enters into the picture, she had, dunya was not in her heart at all. It just didn't. She didn't pray for anything that has to do with, but she did for when she would pray for the health of her children, and she would pray that her grandchildren would grow up pious and would grow up um, strong in their belief. I mean, so it is not in nihilism. It is an honesty and transparency in your relationship with your Lord. she refused to, when we were, this is a different story, but um, when we were younger, um, when we would ask her to pray, she would absolutely tell us that she will never pray for any of us to become rich. Um, and yeah, I mean, she saw wealth as a fitna, that not as an evil, but as a fitna, that it's a real test, a test that's very hard to pass. And she said, "Why would I pray for my children to have a really difficult test in life? Um, if Allah wants it for them, then I just pray that they will pass it. But I don't want to see my children get the toughest tests in life." But all of it was the truth of what she is, and that's the thing I want to emphasize. Be truthful, because if you befriend yourself and you are truthful with yourself, you will learn to be truthful with God, and God cannot be reached. In the same way that I gave a khutbah, I said you can't take your demons on the path to God. Um, the path to God is very difficult, is very rocky for those who are not absolutely truthful with themselves, because only the pure can be processed as you walk that path closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Um, and the closer you get, the purer the higher the standard for purity becomes. When you're maybe in the beginning steps for for you're learning how honesty, you're learning transparency, so and Allah helps you, as the famous tradition, you take one step, Allah takes 10 steps towards you. Um, but yeah, it's the more intimate the relationship that becomes, the purer the process becomes.
Alhamdulillah. So I want to begin with Surah Nisa by my favorite question, which is if you can please just share with us your journey with Surah Al Nisa. Like, what were the things that were, you know, you were really engaged with, you were really obsessed with, things that were turning points for you? Because obviously now we've spent 11 days on the chapter itself, but it would be wonderful to know what your journey was like.
Um, well, the first thing with Surah Nisa, interestingly enough, was because I after immigrating to United States, and all the, I mean, in the dealing with American Muslims, interacting with American Muslims, the thing that you constantly get questions about is the beating verse. Um, and in the old days, it was Muslim summer camps and things like that. Constantly the beating verse. And this is before the rise of Islamophobia, but the beating verse would come up, and then there was a period of time where Ahmad Ali's translation. Ahmad Ali is by the way an Ahmadi. He suggested that the فَضْرِبُوهُنْ means um, or that what the فَضْرِبُوهُنْ means what is have conjugal relations with them, so that that if uh, if um, you're you run into a difficult spouse, a woman, or a difficult wife, then use different tactics. You know, you could talk to her family, you could abstain from bed, you could try to win her favor or win her over by having conjugal relations with her. And that was, you know, popular for a while. Then, of course, a lot of um, because Ahmad Ali is an Ahmadi or of Ahmadi origins. I don't know if what his what his actual beliefs were beyond being born into that. There was a lot of, and then so the interesting thing is that at first Surah Al Nisa is that because of all these questions, and especially after 9/11 and the explosion of Islamophobia, um, but before the explosion of Islamophobia, I had delved um, uh, into this part of Surah An-Nisa, فَضْرِبُوهُنْ, um, uh, in writing the Conference of the Books. And so I had spent, had put in an enormous amount of effort in researching um, the context of these particular ayat. But then, as I developed the as I was studying, as I had studied Surah Al Baqarah and Surah Al Imran, um, um, in my journey in Nisa was quite in late in the process. So I've skipped over in Nisa um, to other surah like Al Hadid or like the Dukhan. So I didn't go in order, but it became increasingly clear that you can't just in any effort to say I want to understand what beat them means or wadribuhun means without understanding the entire context of the surah is a fool's errand. You're and that and again that it requires that you understand the historical period, what were the actual issues. So it is clear that Surah An-Nisa is speaking to an unfolding context and an unfolding challenges. And it is clear from the language that it is addressing resistance. Um, so, what is this resistance? What is this historical reality that, um, and how relevant is it to the message? I don't remember what year in particular, but the more so it is, there is a clear, for if you read enough law, there's a clear legal project in Surah An-Nisa. So you you study the surah again and again and again, and there is a clear legal project. And the legal project is from the beginning of the surah till the very end of the surah. In fact, even after where you looks like you're getting the crowning moral message, again it goes back to the issue of law and says يسألونك كلالة and why the legal project at this historical juncture. So we know that, by the time Surah An-Nisa is revealed, that we've gone through major events like the Battle of Badr and the Battle of Uhud. We've gone through the number of skirmishes that follow the Battle of Uhud. Um, and when you delve deeply enough into this, the journey. So, as I became, why did people at the time find it fit to have this known as Surah Al Nisa? The Quran talks about women elsewhere. Why this surah, Surah Al Nisa? And what then becomes clear as you're researching the traditions is that this revelation, at the time it was being received, the resistance that was taking place, or those who were resisting implementing the legal project, um, were on two fronts: orphans and women. If it would have been called Surah Al Yatama, I wouldn't have been surprised, because it was really on two major fronts where people were having orphans and women. But women was even more prevalent than orphans, just because orphans were not a, uh, a unit of consistent social pressure. But women met and talked and organized and lobbied and intervened and were quite active um, in throughout the dynamics in Medina and throughout the issues that and the debates that surrounded Surah Al Nisa, and the woman going back to the Prophet ﷺ and telling him that we're not receiving our rights, or we're not being treated as our Islam tells us we should be treated. So this was an ongoing social dynamic and an active social process. And then the obvious point that I don't think even takes, Allah asks us to engage in tadabbur, in the process of reflecting and studying the Quran. And I don't think that you even need that much tadabbur to see that the heart of Surah Al-Nisa is ayatul istidaf, the whole thing about the disempowered, and that it was addressing a serious core issue of those who convert to Islam but are too disempowered to change the situation, and those who say they're Muslims but are too weak to challenge their own disempowerment, whether through migration or elsewhere or otherwise. So the amazing thing is that as a legal project, it is, how do I put it, a model for how you can talk about legal change, the social psychology, the psychology of people as they deal with legal change, and ethics. And once you sort of tell yourself, I will try to embrace the full intellect that Allah has given me in my historical moment I'm not going to deny my historical moment. I'm going to fully embrace my historical moment. In other words, I'm not going to try to understand the surah with the intellect of a medievalist that lived 100 years ago. I'm going to try to understand the surah with the intellect of someone who has read in law and ethics and social psychology and knows and has read numerous treatises and monographs that about talking about legal processes for change, ethical challenges, and social resistance to change. And once you embrace that fully, Surah Al Nisa doesn't become a mystery anymore. It is precisely, it's in fact, it just blows your mind that this is at how nuanced Allah is talking to the ethical being, to the legal mind, to the psychology of the masses. Um, but it is definitely a surah that, um, I mean, it is, if the, what it yields is in direct proportion to the sophistication of the person who engages Surah Nisa. If if you don't, if you know, and much of the Quran is like this. It's when Allah invites us to embrace al-aql and al-tafakkur, it is for a very good reason, because it is the more intelligent and knowledgeable and intellectually developed we are, the more we will get from God's revelation. Uh, the less, and then one other thing, and then because I don't want to, and the more honest about our vulnerabilities. I've kept my iman tells me that Allah does not commit dhulm, does not commit an injustice, and Allah will not will an injustice. That's a matter of aqidah for me. And then the supplications, the constant prayer to Allah to help guide your research so that you can understand the hearts and minds of people, the historical moment in the past and what the historical moment in the present demands and requires of you. In other words, Allah, how can I read the Quran today and not fail in my duties towards the Quran? Because if Allah has a powerful meaning to deliver to our day and age today, and I, as a reader of the Quran, fail to understand that powerful message, or I read the Quran and then when I speak to people about the Quran, I sound like out of touch, or I sound archaic, or I sound anachronistic, or that's on me. That's not on the Quran. And that's a type of liability that I fear the most. I fear Allah saying you were negligent. Um, that is terrifying. Yeah, I mean, it's subhanAllah, it's Surah Al Nisa wasn't just it didn't take a long time. And I mean, this is the 12th session. Uh, uh, wow, that's like what? We've been on Surah Al Nisa for several months now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, so in presentation, one halaqah a week, 3 months. Um, I don't remember. I mean, exactly, but I remember Surah Al Nisa. I was I was studying or researching or reading also everything I can get my hands on. Um, if anyone wrote anything other than the well-known tafsir on Surah Nisa, I mean, for a good year. Yeah, it was. It took a lot of research, took a lot of work.
Can you tell us what the dhikr is for the surah?
It's what number is it? It's, 70, 75, and I switch with this one. I've done 75 um, and 97. Both 75 and 97 talk about al-mustadafin. I mean, the heart of the surah itself.
Okay. I know always when we finish a surah or finish a halakha, it's your typical practice to go and like question all the things that you could have said or done differently, or what you
Well,
might have forgotten. Was there anything that after we finished that maybe you felt you wanted to talk about, cover again, skipped over, went too fast, rushed too much?
no, this type of waswasa is like, it makes me want to do the entire surah over again. I mean, so
Just brilliant.
another 3 months of just redoing the surah because it just
No, alhamdulillah, it was amazing. It's okay. All right, so why don't we start? Let me open up to whoever is brave enough to kick off with the first question. Anybody? Raise your hand. All right. I'm gonna go down and she's crying. I'm just gonna go down and help her out.
well, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's still crying.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
Thank you so much. Your khutbah yesterday was mind blowing as usual, but I felt I collected like 3 questions over the course of going over the surah, and um, the idea of how deceptive and how just how conniving that thing in me is that is making all of life about what I want, but convincing myself that it has nothing to do with that, and that it has everything to do with principle and the ways that I automatically justify it, just is mind blowing. Like in those very few moments of honesty, where it seems like a veil gets lifted and almost like Allah gifts me with this little window of extreme honesty, and I actually like see it for what it is. And otherwise I feel like I'm struggling with it from moment to moment and trying to combat it. And so that made me think of asking the question that I had, because I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but in regards to verse, I think it's 119. Hold on, let me double check. About cutting the slitting the ears of cattle. Um, do human beings, is there a situation, because the slitting the ears of cattle was in regards to the shaitan is going to go and make you, it's tribalism, is going to go and make you think that you're superior to other people based on other things, or that you're different, is going to cause discord between you. It seems like all of those things kind of fall under that metaphor of slitting the ears of cattle. Is there any situation where shaitan is not involved with slitting the ears of cattle, or is it across the board that action of separation of, and to word this in a different way to get at what I'm trying to get at is, elsewhere in the Quran it talks about how the true, you're only better than each other in terms of the good that you do, in terms of these other qualities that God esteems. And that, if you're doing some mental gymnastics, could be considered a form of slitting the ears of cattle. In terms of, I'm not better based on how much money I have or what I wear or my tribal affiliations, but I am better in terms of the good deeds that I do. So is there a form of slitting the ears of cattle which is justified, or is it across the board, this is just an evil act and we should be looking for all of the ways that we separate from each other, or all of the ways that we cause discord between each other, and recognize that for what it is, which is shaitan?
Okay, I want to just put this in context because so okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing those who يتخذون الشيطان وليا من دون الله, that they whether knowingly or unknowingly, their companion becomes shaitan or shaitani things, and specifically this slitting of ears of camel, or tabkit adhan al-an'am. So we know that there is a historical practice that is talking about. The historical practice that is talking about is that the Meccans would mark cattle that are dedicated to the temple, in other words, to the priests of the temple, by marking the ears of cattle. And it is this but then Surah Al Nisa, from that historical example, takes it as a launchpad to a larger point. And the larger point is that when shaitan actively induces people to alter the nature of God's creation. فَلْيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقِ اللَّهِ, that they and of course here the taghyir, that from the context it's clear that the taghyir that it's talking about is either you are instead of whatever use you engage in, you are engaging in it with the full awareness that this is you from God and to God. So in fact, like for instance, if you are slaughtering an animal, that the only reason or the only way that you can have the authority to slaughter this animal, to consume it, is that by invoking the permission of the Creator. Because without the permission of the Creator, then you actually do not have any claim of right, any possible claim of right to whatever you engage in, it is a form of transgression, because you're actually just claiming an entitlement that no real authority has given you. And in reality, when you act in this fashion, de facto, you are falling in the lap of Shaitan's authority. But what you're talking about is the slitting of ears of camel becoming sort of a um, symbolic act for human vanity, um, where we are, how do you put what we are altering God's creations for vain reasons. Is this what you have in mind?
I mean, yeah, yes, but also I think in addition to that, altering God's creation in the sense of reducing either people or things or existence to functions in
Oh, I
terms of
see.
how
Yes.
it serves me. So I mean, one of those iterations would be vanity.
Right, right. Okay, yeah, I got you. Yeah. You know, this is, subhanAllah, I mean, this is becoming, of course, we are in a position to understand how this could really be shaitani better than even earlier generations could, because we see the effect when you take the altering of creation and the altering of nature. When human beings start dealing with creation from the perspective of entitlement, and without ismullah, without even the idea of God entering into it, and as a result, I mean, we are on the verge of extinction, or making life on Earth quite, and it is quite shaitani. I mean, it is. So it is a critical concept that um, the least we can do is that any use we engage in, it would be a conscientious use, a cautious use, and a use that is clear as to what type of divine permission is given for the use. Um, this is at the larger point. I mean, in the way that we use nature, but at the individual level, and especially in relation to the khutbah, the point is that okay. So number one, it is critical that one is honest with oneself. Two, it is critical that we engage in healthy, a healthy um, critique of the self. That we are introspective. You know, that you become preoccupied instead of noticing all the faults of everyone around you. That you notice, you look inwards and constantly interrogate your intentions and motives. Most of us only know Allah through the childish dynamic of give me. Now, it is not I'm not saying that that's shaitani. I'm not saying that that's evil. I'm not saying that this is like the slitting of the ears of cattle um, for shaitani purposes. Or تغيير خلق الله for vain reasons or for reasons that are unjust or unjustified. But it is important to, and it is important to be at a minimum aware that of the limitations of a childish knowledge of God. That if you know Allah only through the dynamic of give me, Alhamdulillah, because you've given me, and God, I will, I will be vigilant and patient because you denied me, but I'm upset about it because in reality there are a lot of people that when their calamity befalls them and they're patient and they persevere, they sort of think like they're very proud of themselves as if they God owes them or something. This type of relationship, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm not saying it's evil. What I'm saying is that it is primitive, it is limited, and it is important for one to understand the nature of his or her relationship with Allah, because being aware of the nature of your relationship is the promise of growth. The ideal or the more mature relationship is where you are أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان, that Allah answers the call, that you call upon Allah not because of give me or deny me, but because of the companionship, the very relationship that you have with Allah, from Allah's nearness to you. And you can't you can't get from 0 to 100. All of us go through the stage of give me. Do you get beyond that stage? Well, it depends on how much you dislike being in that stage. If you basically reflect and say, yeah, my relationship with God is basically, I constantly pray, Allah, I want a better job, Allah, I want this, Allah, I want that. And when Allah gives it to me, I'm very grateful. And when Allah doesn't, I'm upset, but I'm patient. But I don't see any reason to go beyond that. Then khalas. Then that's your relationship with Allah. And in my view, it's a very limited relationship, and it's a vulnerable relationship, because how much denial will get you to the point where you say, I am now really angry at God. Because this is exactly what happens to a lot of people. Allah presents them with one test after another, and they get to their breaking point. And because they got accustomed to that relationship. And they get to the breaking point where they're now feel alienated from God because God has denied them. If you get to know God beyond the giving or the taking from God, or either the taking or denial, and then it is like any elevated, intimate relationship. It's like, you don't love your mother or your father less because, or you're not supposed to, or if someone stops loving their mother because their mother no longer is in a position to give them, their mother got older and all, what do we say? We say this is not real love. This is not really good relationship. The ideal relationship is that you're going to love your mother, whether your mother gives you or not, doesn't give you, whether your mother is poor or rich. That's, or same thing with a spouse. A bad marriage is a marriage where they, one partner, a husband or wife, can no longer give, and so love goes out the window. It, a an elevated marriage is a marriage that is beyond the relationship of giving and taking. You love the person for who the person is, for better or worse. Whether this person, is dying of cancer, but you still love them. It, to have a relationship with Allah beyond needs is precisely that, like that relationship that is not affected. It, it's just that we don't apply, for whatever reason. If you tell someone, uh, what type of love do you want? Do you want a love that is based on masalih, on based on what you get and what you give, or do you want a love that is beyond that? And most people will rationally, when it comes to another human being, will say, no, I want a love beyond that. I don't want a love based on masalih. What type of love is that? But we don't apply that same logic to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's like Allah is as if Allah deserves less than what we expect when it comes to other human beings. Love based on what you give and what you take and what you give is a love that is very, when Shaitan says to Allah, to God, that Allah will take nasib mafrood from ibadullah, that Shaitan will take, it says, I will take a known percentage. Like, you can count on the fact that a set percentage, it will never be that they all pass the test, because human beings, because Shaitan knows that even those who believe in Allah often never get beyond the faith premised on masalih. Give me, or give me and give me more and give me more, and then, look, the Prophet ﷺ, how many children did Allah take away from the Prophet ﷺ in his lifetime? I mean, he saw all his children die in his lifetime. It is as if nothing about the life of the Prophet ﷺ is happenstance or just coincidence. Allah is teaching us through the example of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a man who, you want to understand what a real relationship with Allah. A real relationship with Allah can endure even the most brutal of tests. The death of a child, which so many people, that's the one test that they can't pass. If a child is taken away from them, it's as if their soul dies. How many children were taken from the Prophet ﷺ? And if you study his seerah, you could tell that this was a man, he was not a cold man. He was, in fact, a very emotionally vested man. That he celebrated his children and his grandchildren in ways that make you feel even inadequate. The way he played with children, the way he joked with children, the way uh, came down to their level, and the way his heart broke when he lost a child. But he knew Allah beyond that, beyond what I'm going to take from you and what I will give you in terms of ibadat or dua or whatever. It's an ideal, but it is an ideal that one must aspire to. Because if you don't aspire to it, your your love will remain primitive. And whether you know whether it's actually love at all, hubbul masalih, whether it's love at all. It could be obedience, it could be a relationship based on shared interests. Subhanallah, I mean, we don't think of the fact that how absurd it is. Allah comes down to our level and talks to us about itijara rabiha, that Allah will, how about I do a very profitable business? But the profit is very one sided. I mean, the profit is all due to us. But Allah is coming down to our level and sort of like speaking down, like you'd speak to little babies, like speak to little children. Let's do a deal that's very profitable, and we never pause to think, well, profitable. God profits nothing. God gets nothing out of this, absolutely nothing. So, but it are stages in development. It's like developmental psychology. You need people you take them step by step. And in Surah Al Nisa, subhanallah, it is it the thing that is it's sort of coming confronting straight on are why certain people who said we believe, who committed themselves to being part of Muslim society, and yet they are unable to be on board with seeing the asabiyya, the biases and the prejudices that they've lived with all their life be deconstructed before their eyes. This is not just the past, this is even today. Because, look, our world today, the asabiyya of race and ethnicity still is supreme. Why did Europe react to the plight of Ukrainians the way they react? And why Europe does not react to the plight of Syrians or the plight of Yemenis or the plight of whoever? Uh, it's because of the asabiyya of ethnicity. Unfortunately for Muslims, uh, they have the asabiyya of the watan. The Saudis, you know, will ignore, although they are closer to the Yemenis than any European is close to another European. But nevertheless, they're still in the asabiyya of the Saudis are Saudis, Egyptians are Egyptians, the Palestinians are Palestinians, which is absolutely devastating. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and says, elevate, it's as if the reason these people are unable to commit to the ethical reforms that Islam is instituting is because of their asabiyya to tradition, to clans, to tribes, to habits, to
Is loyalty?
yeah, is not loyalty, like prejudice, like nationalism, like your biases towards something, like if someone insults your family, or someone is unjust to your family, you can see the injustice. But if the same injustice befalls someone not related to your family, you don't see it. That's asabiyya. That you have blinders towards certain commitments. Uh, so these people who could not follow suit with the reforms were committed to these traditions and these habits, and their love for Allah and for the Prophet ﷺ couldn't trump these prejudices that they have. Sadly, sadly, this is even far more pertinent for us today. We are unable as Muslims. The reason, I mean, I was amazed. Like I was telling some people, this company, 70% of its income comes from Russia and Belarus, and it divested from Russia and Belarus because of the invasion of Ukraine, losing 70% of its profit. And I think to myself, Muslims are, the ability for Muslims to act by principle doesn't even come close to that. So we are the modern Muslims. The reason we can sit here and see the plight of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the reason we can sit here and look, I want to, this is, I'm going to stop after this, but because I just, do you know that the ethical core of the Muslim Ummah, throughout the Muslim Ummah's history, people online, listen carefully to this, because this is a historical point that you only hear from a stuffy academic. The conscience of the Muslim Ummah was always in its masajid. It was the mosque that was the public space where if the space of the mosque, the masajid, is healthy, the Muslim Ummah is healthy. If it's unhealthy, the Muslim Ummah is unhealthy. Because it was the mosque that acted like the PR center, acted like, today's social media center. People would go and pray 5 times a day. People would pray Jum'ah. They would exchange informations. Deals would be struck. The mosque was the center of learning, was the center of social advocacy. Was this when a woman would suffer an injustice or orphans would suffer an injustice, where would they go? Often going to Qasr al-Khalifa, or the palace of the wali or the ruler or whatever. They couldn't access it because there's guards. They go to the mosque. They go to the mosque. Why? Because they want to talk to a sheikh that would have the authority to get their complaint to the people in power. The way that our Muslim Ummah maintained some level of health was always in the vibrancy of the masajid. I personally believe that, and you find this in, subhanAllah, when you study the annals and documents of French colonialism and British colonialism, is how much they focused on, we can't rein Muslims in unless we get control over that masjid space, because we can control what they say in the marketplace, but we are having a very hard time controlling what they say in the masjid space. And their hostility to the madrasa and the madrasa system that was often in the space of the mosque was, a narrative in itself. Lo and behold, decades go forward, and you find, after the invasion of Iraq, what was the Bush administration yapping about all the time? is the Muslim madrasas and how we can't fight Islamic fanaticism and Islamic extremism unless we control the madrasa system. But what in the modern age you find these modern nation states have done, which is unprecedented because the power of the modern state is quite unprecedented, is to deny Muslims that space. So, whatever ethical discourse, whatever social advocacy, whatever moral conscience activity that has to do with the moral conscience, if it takes place, it can only take place outside the mosque, because in Muslim country after they've even the way the modern Muslim is brainwashed into the idea that it is okay to open a mosque just for prayer and then close it. That's one of the things that when I came to the United States, it shocked me to find that it was just taken for granted. Yeah, sure. While if you actually study the fiqh al-masajid, the idea of closing a mosque, like closing, shutting down a house of God in off times, is a bid'ah. Now you want to talk about a bid'ah? That's the bid'ah. But by emptying Masajidullah, the house of God, from moral space, the only thing that was left for the Muslim populace is the most superficial relationship with their faith and with their God. And that's why this whole notion of that you have a relationship with Allah based on just maslahah is so prevalent today. Because the type of social psychology that Surah Al Nisa educates us on about how people can say we believe but yet remain resistant to transformation through iman, for for nur to pervade their life, is something that has become very alien to us, something that we're not exposed to. I know I'm
No, it's okay.
talking too much.
No. You're not. We should break, yeah.
Oh, is it Maghrib?
It's Maghrib now. Yeah. So let's, yeah. One, you're not talking too much. That's why we're here, is to learn from you. So feel free and don't feel self-conscious. And secondly, it is time for us to break Maghrib. So we're going to take a bit of time to have a little bit of dinner, I guess.
No.
We'll just grab plates and come back and pray. Sorry,
No,
we're going to
not,
pray.
not that long. We're 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
We'll shoot for 10 minutes, but it'll probably be a little bit longer.
Yeah, but the conversion rate will be 20 minutes.
Okay. So you know what we're doing. We're praying, we're going to grab some food, and then we'll be back. Okay? So we'll see you soon, inshallah. Welcome back. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We're going to get started again. And we just had, we wanted to finish up a little bit from the last question. So Sharif's just going to get us back there.
So during the break, I just clarified, because during the halaqah, when we were at this part in the verse, you made the comment that the historical, the habit that they had of slitting the ears to mark cattle contributed to a system of tribalism. And then you posed the question, in what ways do we mark human beings today? Because it wasn't just that they were altering God's creation in terms of the cattle, but it was the resulting tribalism. And then you gave the example also of the moral treatment of human beings based on citizenship. So then my question was kind of an extension of that last idea of in what other ways do we treat human beings differently based by other criteria other than citizenship? and I felt, and I was kind of submitting that it's based on, because we reduce people to functions often in this society.
Yeah, subhanallah, we often, although we study this material in high school, and of course it's presented to us in a little bit of an cleaned up fashion. The Industrial Revolution. The Revolution was a major point of transformation in human social psychology because of the invention of the idea of the assembly line. The assembly line where people were no longer members of a craft and a trade, but rather they can perform a very specific and very uncreative, a very limited function, so their labor can be distilled and can separated from creativity. So it's not the person who does the labor who is also invests the creativity, but you take creativity and you give it to a set of people, and you give labor and you give it to a set of people, and those that are obligated with the function of labor, they are expected to perform without the creative element, which is the human element. And if we were delving into Tadabbur Quran and exploring the philosophy of Allah's ethics more systematically and more deeply, then there are many ways that we are engaging in taghyir and khalqillah, that we, what is the taghyir khalqillah, and what is the process of uh, when we dehumanize a human being. It is a taghyir khalqillah. When we decide, so for, I mean, subhanallah, it's like when we now have how you deal with a human being is often determined by, as you reminded me, I mentioned this before, by the passport that they carry. And like right now in the United States, Trump did something that is unprecedented in international law. He took the army of a country, the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, and designated this entire army as a terrorist organization. Biden came to power, he didn't reverse that order, which means that all the Iranians, this is ongoing right now in the United States, that all the Iranians who served who were drafted, conscripted in the Revolutionary Guards are now having served in a terrorist organization, so they could find themselves they can lose their permanent residency, they could even lose their citizenship, they can be deported. Any Iranian that was conscripted in the military and served in the revolutionary, although having no choice, this type of marking of a human being and a dehumanizing of a human being and a demoralizing of a human being, treating them in these set categories. Now, of course, this rises from another factor, is that if it hadn't been for racism, it is impossible to treat human beings this way. if you didn't discount their humanity, which is the essence of racism. So what I'm saying is that there are so many ways that we engage in تغيير خلق الله that we could have invested ourselves in philosophically and explored systematically and presented the world with a Quranic ethic or Quranic ethics that would be relevant, would be pertinent, would be pressing, uh, would be entirely within the moment, and would be committed to the liberation of humanity. But of course, this requires a very different relationship with the Quran, where we are listening to what, when we are fully engaged with Allah's speech, as truly, when Allah tells us that Allah has given us a light to take us out of darkness, we take that very seriously and we say, what are all the ways that this is truly an enlightenment, an illumination upon humanity?
Thank you. I'm gonna, in transparency, I'm gonna jump in with a question that I think is relevant because it's not about Surah Nisa, but it touches on everything that we've been talking about, and it's important if we are interested in doing the Seer project in the future. So many Orientalists, like Patricia Crone, boldly claim that it is virtually impossible to know anything about the Prophet and Islam during his lifetime because there's no reliable historical material. Throughout Surah Al Nisa and Project Illumine more generally, the Seerah has been critical to understanding the Quran. What are your thoughts on this, and is this something that you might address in the Seerah project?
Yeah, I mean, the issue of sources is very important because actually, when you start talking about the Sirah, although this might be for the uninitiated or for the average Muslim a bit of an overkill, but it's very necessary. It's very necessary to address the issue of sources, and to address the issue of sources in other than the just simply pietistic way. I mean, because you can't address the issue of sources where you only talk about Sunni sources but ignore all others, or you only talk about Jafari sources and then you ignore all others, or you only talk about Zaydi for sources and all others. You have to have a thorough historical engagement with all the sources from all the various theological perspectives that talked about the Prophet ﷺ. But more to this issue of Patricia Crone and so on, this whole Orientalist idea that maybe there was never a prophet, maybe this is just all a fable, a mythological invention. Of course, some thought that maybe this comes from the field of religious studies, people who, the group of historians who said that maybe Jesus never existed and maybe Jesus was just a myth that was invented. And the historians who wrote on this thought, well, maybe Jesus was particularly an invention, a convenient historical invention for the Roman Empire to unite the Roman Empire over a religious core. But the truth of the matter is that this Orientalist discourse about the Prophet not existing at all actually predates all the religious discourse, the not religious, but all the historical discourses that grew out of religious studies that questioned the existence of the historical Jesus. It predates because we we know from the European, what Europe was hearing about the Prophet for centuries was highly distorted, and they didn't even get the story straight about who was who for a good 300, 400 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. But you know, it's all premised on the sort of the Patricia Crone assumption, which she you found in Hagerism and some of her other writings. Even Michael Cook retreated from that position because it's quite frankly very racist. That you can't believe anything Muslims say about their own history, and so that the only reliable testimonials is what non-Muslims say about Islamic history. But then you run into a problem, is that the testimonials of non-Muslims about Islamic history is widely crazy, off the mark, for centuries. I mean, they weren't even sure who Muhammad exactly was, whether he was claiming to be a Christian heretic, whether he was claiming to be divine, whether the Christian narrative itself is extremely conflicted and quite frankly just very fantastical. But can you imagine if we applied this methodology? So we said we will not accept, we will only read or only accept non-European narratives when we try to read European history, and we or even today, if you say, I'm not going to take anything Americans say about what the U.S. did or didn't do, or what the U.S. is, or whatever. I'm only going to take what Russians say or what the Chinese say. It's blatantly a blatantly absurd methodology. And if it hasn't been for the colonial legacy and the fact that Muslims are a defeated people, no self-respecting Muslim would have taken this methodology seriously. I mean, even Michael Cook, all people who had an opportunity to study with Michael Cook, Michael Cook is still, I mean, I'm not saying, he's still an Orientalist because he still tends to assume that Muslims are incapable of creative thought by themselves, and whenever he finds something that is creative and so on, he assumes that Muslims must have taken it from Judaism, which is again Orientalist. But the idea that, we can't trust anything Muslims say about themselves, ends up with absurd texts like Hagerism. I mean, which is really, it's very difficult to take that book seriously. And the only reason you can get away with a book like this is because of the state of the field. But yes, I mean, if we talk about the Sirah, we have to talk about sources. And for instance, I think that Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba or Abdul Razzaq are often more rich sources or nuanced sources or Kitab al-Asl on the sira or the reality of the first century of Islam than Bukhari or Nisa'i, and why is that? So we would need to get into the whole discussion, and people are free to agree or disagree with me. That's up to them, but the conversation is very necessary. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it up again to anyone here who's ready for the question. Joe? Okay.
Thank you very much. So just a very short one, just in response to what you were saying to Sharif's question about Taghyir Khalqillah, like changing the creation of Allah. Even disempowerment, Nisa is all about al-istid'af. God did not create any person to be disempowered.
Yeah.
So when you disempower them,
You
you're
are,
not then
yeah.
changing the creation of Allah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I hope all of you heard this, that when you disempower human beings, you are engaging in Taghyir Khalqillah. I mean, listen, this is really, if you grew up in a society where you've seen not just even a child, for God's sake, even animals. When an animal, like a little puppy, the nature of that puppy is the puppy explores, a puppy plays, a puppy, you could tell a puppy is happy if the puppy is loved, taken care of, fed. You see how this puppy flourishes. Same like a human child. A human child is curious, is friendly, smiles, hugs, kisses, and it expresses all types of craziness. But that's the nature of a child. And then oppressiveness sets in. Like if a puppy is mistreated, all that playfulness evaporates. All the inquisitiveness, the desire to know, the exploratory self. The puppy is constantly exploring, like a child is constantly getting into everything. But then you oppress them, and they cringe, and they become like a shell. And it's as if the life is sucked out of them. The more and more they become, and this is the thing with oppressed people, they become walking dead, truly. They're alive but dead. And how is that not Taghyir Khalqillah? I mean, it is absolutely, and that is why I think for the way we even treat livestock is it's atrocious, because you're taking animals, and some of these animals are born and die in a very limited space where they cannot move or graze or do anything. They're born in a very limited space. They remain in that very limited space until the point of their death. That's just, it's against the nature of Allah's creation. Who gives us permission to do this? Who, it blows your mind. How is that consistent with the essence of the Quran? It baffles me.
Shayna?
Thank you, Sheikh. This surah mentions in two separate occasions the concept of kitab al-hikmah.
Right. Yeah.
And in the overall, given the overall motifs of the surah, it's really interesting to then think about then what does hikmah mean in this situation.
Is it just, the casual, how we say hadith and ilm al-ladunni and this kind of a thing, or is it something more? And in the first instance, when it's talking about Ahl Bayt Nabi Ibrahim, as they are the ones who inherited this
Right.
kitab al-hikmah.
Hikmah, right.
Well, surely, yes, from his progeny were prophets. But when we talk about, in prayer, for example, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala Ibrahim. In what way then is there, maybe this is a better question during Surah Ahzab or something like that, but what is the role of the hikmah? Is this a God-given thing, or can you shed some light on that? Does hikmah have anything to do with ahkam, or does it have to do with anything with legal reasoning? Can you give us a little bit more about what this means?
Okay.
Rephrase.
The question is that that in Surah Al Nisa, twice Allah mentions in Surah Al Nisa al-kitab wal-hikmah, and more specifically that it specifies that Ibrahim alayhi salam was given al-kitab wal-hikmah, and then in the context of what was given to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, again it emphasizes al-kitab wal-hikmah. And the reference to kitab wal-hikmah in Surah An-Nisa is quite purposeful, and there are two main points I want to make about this. One is that it is like a symbiotic relationship. The kitab without hikmah cannot work, and hikmah without the kitab cannot work. And the kitab, of course, is the object of tadabbur. But what is the vehicle for tadabbur? What is the tool for tadabbur kitab? And this is inshallah we'll have a question to comment about hikmah more systematically, but the hikmah taps into all the normative obligations that Allah sets for us in the kitab itself, but we absolutely need al-hikmah to even begin a coherent understanding of these. So when Allah says, when Allah obligates us with ihsan, or with qist, or with adl, or with shahada, it is only taking the linguistic meaning of these concepts and stopping there is cheating your duties, cheating in your duties towards God. Because if Allah invokes these concepts, Allah is there's no indication that Allah is telling you, then I am invoking a qist to the extent that it is defined in Lisan al-Arab by Ibn Manzur. When Allah invokes a concept like qist or ihsan or ma'ruf or shahada, then the entire epistemological universe of these concepts is tapped into. So it's then you are obligated to, and I believe that this is precisely what allowed the Muslim civilization to be what it was, is that people, when the early generations of Muslims, when they looked at hikmah and they saw the symbiotic relationship between kitab and hikmah, they understood from hikmah is that, exactly as the Prophet ﷺ says, that hikmah is ضالة المؤمن فأينما وجدها فهو أحق بها, that hikmah is entitlement of a Muslim wherever a Muslim finds it. Uh, it is absolutely incumbent upon a Muslim to embrace it. Using your reason to think ethically without the guidance of a kitab is a fallacy. It's a philosophical fallacy. Because ultimately you will end up relying on assumptions that cannot be vetted. Ultimately they are in themselves assumption based on belief, but that belief is vacuous. That either assumptions about human nature is one way, or the social obligations or social covenants or social contracts, or they're vacuous. They're assumption based on ultimately on an act of conviction that is not verifiable beyond itself. But at the same time, if you attempt al-kitab without al-hikmah, then you will be reading the book as if it's a code of law. And what al-hikmah obligates you to do is to, when Allah tells you كونوا قوامين بالقسط, this is such a profound taklif. It's a profound charge for Allah to say you have the obligation to be qa'im bil qist. Qa'im bil qist meaning you have to establish qist. You have to be vigilant. It's as if the obligation of justice have been placed on your shoulders. How are you going to do that? Well, if you do that blindly by saying, I'm going to pretend that I'm whatever, I'll just read the Quran like a code of law, and whatever I can implement in a very positivistic fashion, I'm going to take. But whatever requires nuance and complexity, I'm just going to ignore as if it's not there. I'm going to ignore historical circumstance. I'm going to ignore what the moral project of the Quran is. I'm going to ignore what the history. I'm going to ignore all types of fields of knowledge, whether sociology, anthropology, whatever. I'm going to ignore. How is that a qa'im baqist? It is such a profound charge, and so that's all one aspect of al-hikmah. But there is another aspect that I think modern Muslims, unfortunately, in part because of what we did in Mecca and Medina, if we understood, if you want to really demoralize and defeat people, and I wish people would read the British archive, from either the archive of British colonialism in India, or the archive of British colonialism in Arabia, or the archive of the British in Egypt, and how you want to dominate people. And in your mind, it wasn't too long ago before these people were in your backyard in Spain for centuries, right? And it wasn't too long before, time and time again, you would send these armies to Jerusalem and they would get pushed back. And it wasn't too long ago when these people were in the heart of Europe and at the gates of Vienna. And you're now, you can't believe your good fortune that, like General Allenby said when he stood at the gates of Salah, at the graveyard of Salah ad-Din, and said, "Oh, Salah ad-Din, here we've come back. We've returned." You can't believe your good fortunes that these people that were your that were constantly the persistent menace for centuries. And now you find yourself, you have utterly conquered them and in complete control of their lands. Jerusalem, Mecca, Medina, you know, all you, and in fact, you're bragging about how, like, you pretend to be Muslims or even not pretend, and you go visit Mecca and Medina, and then you write diaries, and then these diaries become hot sellers back home, and everyone wants to read about your adventures among these retarded barbarian Bedouins as you went on your journey to Mecca and Medina, and these things, you know, are hot sellers in this time. What is a better way to dominate the people, to break their spirit, than to control their holy lands and to empty the heart of their, what they consider holy sacred space, of all real life? Why am I saying this? Because there is an aspect to hikmah that is, like, we have a text that is full of truly a text of unadulterated hikmah. You need several lifetimes to study the hikmah in this text, and that's Nahj al-Balagha of Imam Ali. It is mind-blowing. The role of the legacy of especially the family of the Prophet in allowing us to have a pulse on the morality of Islam. But why am I mentioning colonialism? What among the first things that colonialism did is that it broke the bond between Muslims and the Ashraf. Muslims for a long time had a sense of reverence towards the idea of those who descended from the, and irreverence towards, even if at times, you know, it resulted in corruptions of, you know, superstition and bizarre rituals and all of that. But ultimately, you do not, it is very difficult to miss the extent to whether Shi'i or Sunni would study and invest in a text like Nahj al-Balagha for centuries, and how sharp that connection is severed when, through the auspices of colonialism, one, the Ashraf are corrupted in British colonialism, bribing the Ashraf and having them rebel against the Ottoman Empire and becoming a political faction and a political party that ultimately is promised a certain role and then betrayed, and then, but it is thoroughly corrupted through bribery. So people lost heart in even believing that in the moral guidance of Ahlul Bayt. But then second, you give Mecca and Medina to the most puritanical, truly, the people who denied the role of the Ashraf the most. I mean, they're theologically, they're the most Khawarij-like. And you help them to be in control in Mecca and Medina, and of course give Jerusalem to, because it was absolutely, everyone knew that it's only a matter of time before the Israelis would, if the people who are in charge of Jerusalem up to 67 are the Jordanians, and the head of the Jordanian army is a British officer. You can't move, or you can't import weapons without the British authorities saying, yes, these weapons can go to the Jordanian army. You can't have a military exercise without the British signing off on the military exercise. And you can't recruit soldiers without the British signing off on the. You can't move troops without the British signing off on movement of troops. And these are the people who are in charge of Jerusalem, the Jordanian army. And of course, it's not a surprise that Israel was able to push that army like it was nothing, because it was a paper army. It was an army that was only could be effective in one thing and one thing only: suppressing its own people, i.e., suppressing unarmed people. That is the. It's like the Saudi army that for many years the United States sponsored. It is an army, but it is only good for killing fellow Muslims. But it can't really do anything else. It can't even liberate Kuwait or even defend its own country. And it's completely dependent. Part of this is that we need to rediscover the sources of hikmah in the Islamic tradition, because so much of our relationship to the repositories of wisdom in our tradition have been cut and severed. The nature of wisdom is cumulative. Generation learns from generation, learns from generation, learns from generation. If each generation was charged with rethinking hikmah from scratch, we never go anywhere. That's not the way knowledge works. That's not the way knowledge develops. And I was just reading this thing, a debate. It's about the issue of tajseed. What's amorphisms? Whether God has the hand and arm and eyes and so on. But the text that they were talking about, I was just struck by how the fellow who was arguing about this text didn't understand what he was reading, because it's clear that he just picked up the book and started reading it without any training. So he's misunderstanding. But if he understood what the text that he read, then it could have helped his own intelligence by leaps and bounds, because maybe he could add something to it. But if you are misunderstanding it, then you are going back to the days before that text even existed, and you are rediscovering the alphabet again. And that's exactly what so many of us have been doing since the crumbling of the Islamic civilization, is rediscovering the alphabet. You get a scholar, and the scholar, by the time they get to even a near enlightenment position, their life is over. Khalas, the time have passed, and they're old, and it's time to die. And then comes another, and that's the cycle we keep going into.
My question is about the verse, the phrase "Hududullah" in verses 13 and 14, which comes immediately after the inheritance verses. So the word "hudud" has come to represent the concept of rigidly defined, static, immutable rules. And I know you've written in your books and articles how you criticize the elevating the status of the criminal punishments to hudud, or saying that these are immutable rules. But here what does hudud mean here in this context? And obviously many people argue that the 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 usage of hudud here is evidence of the fact that the inheritance laws are very strictly defined and unchangeable. But so and then another argument would be, if this was meant to change, then why would God have, put it in plain terms? So how does that give us license to be able to change it?
Yeah, okay, so okay, where did it start with? All right. So first, just so everyone is with us on the same page. So you have in Surah Al Nisa. Okay, let's take it this way. I can approach ayah number 13. These are Allah's boundaries, and whoever obeys Allah and the Prophet, Allah enters them into heaven, gives them entry into heaven, and this is the great victory. Now, this ayah 13 is sandwiched between a discourse that comes before it that specifies للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون. And so men have a share, women have a share, and then also note وإذا حضر قسمة أولي القربى واليتامى والمساكين فارزقوهم من, that if the relatives or yatama or orphans or poor are present during the qisma, then they have a share. And then it goes on to talk about those who eat the money of orphans unjustly, those who usurp the money of orphans unjustly, that how they will go to hellfire. Then it goes on to talk about inheritance again of a brother and sister from a parent. And then after it talks about inheritance, then you have the ayah about hududullah, and then after the ayah, it goes into the issue of fahisha mindset. So what Muslims have done is that they come and look at this and say, okay, well, men have a share, women have a share, okay, fine, each has a right. They ignore completely verse number 8, that the poor and orphans and whatever, if they are present at the hadra qisma, that they must have a share. They وليخشى الذين لو تركوا من خلفهم ذرية ضعافا خافوا عليهم فليتقوا الله ويقولوا قولا سديدا. They are very lax when it comes to what they owe orphans and the rights of orphans, to the point that they are not at all troubled with the fact that orphans are grabbed and put in houses that are just full of injustice and abuse, and they go on in their way. They have no clue what to do with واللاتي يأتين الفاحشة من نسائكم فاستشهدوا عليهن 4 شهور and so on. They completely ignore that. Out of this, all of this discourse, the hududullah aspect is only applied to للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين. That's how text is processed through the subjectivities of a reader. The reader doesn't know what to do with why Allah says men have a share and women have a share. Why emphasize this? Is it just I mean, it's superfluous. Why not just say, give men this amount, give women this amount? Why do you need this penultimate statement, this sort of constitutional statement that comes first? They don't know what to do, or they don't want to implement وَإِذَا حَضَرَ قِسْمَ أُولِي القُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. So that part they leave away. They don't want. They don't know what to do with الفاحشة يأتينا الفاحشة عن أربعة شهور and all of that stuff. So they ignore that part. And the part that they focus on is the gendered part. And they say, well, that's when Allah is saying hudud. That's what Allah is talking about. Well, there's a very different way to understand hududullah. Hududullah, and that is to understand the moral project of Surah Al Nisa. Surah Al Nisa, which not even a very diligent research would reveal, was, and even in the text itself, from the text, you see this clearly from the way that the narrative Surah Al-Nisa, it is going against the grain of society. And it is saying to people that don't give yatama their share, don't give masakin their share, don't give uli qurba their share, don't give women the share that is a matter of right, like, and not even all men get their share as a matter of right. It's only men who are healthy, of a fighting age, who can in fact fight, etc., etc. And it's coming and it's saying, against the grain, all of this has to change. And it comes and empowers people with the magic of rights. Now, hududullah, all rights that accrue to God, in a social context, are actually rights that accrue to human beings. God stands in for the rights of human beings, because in the same way that Allah invites us to a tijara, a commerce that is profitable, and it's all for us, for our benefits, hududullah itself is for our benefit. And so when I approach the issue of hududullah, and I am the question, I take every part of it seriously. That when Allah says that masakin and yatama and uli qurba must have a share, I take that very seriously. When Allah says that don't make accusations of fahisha without 4 witnesses, and in my own experiences as a lawyer, I can't tell you how many couple I've been involved with who accuse each other of all types of fawahish and have no imam says, well, you can't say that about your spouse without 4 witnesses. It doesn't even, when you mention it to them, they're like, as if you've mentioned something that is, a completely different language, although it's right there in Surah Al Nisa. But the more critical point is a woman inheriting half of what a man inherits in certain situations, because there's something about a woman's gender. Is it because whatever represents womanhood, her aura, her bodily parts, her brain, her whatever, is that the illah for her inheritance? Or is the illah the function that she performs? I see no evidence. And what do Muslims in fact do? And I mean, all these people who tell you come do Islamic inheritance law, lawyer after lawyer that I've had experiences with, they'll tell you, as they tell you about Islamic inheritance law, they'll also tell you about the tricks, all the tricks and how to get around Islamic inheritance law. So, how to in fact give your daughter as much as your son, but here are the tricks of how to do it. Is that hududullah? When I look at the function, when I say that the illah of ahkam al-waratha is the function, then I look at the reality, and I am duty bound in order to honor hududullah, to look at the reality of a woman's empowerment, because we can't we can't pretend that males have not occupied a privileged position in society. And that privilege, when it is consistently at the expense of someone, it could be prone to the production of a great deal of injustice. In order to address that injustice, what I learned from Surah Al Nisa, it's like Allah is saying, what is hududullah, pay careful attention to how you treat women and how you treat orphans and masakin, but especially women and orphans. It's like Allah saying, if you fail me, my hudud is that if you fail me when it comes to women, so if women enter your society, in reality, okay, let's not pretend. I read an article that made me tear about how in Iran a large number of women end up prostituting themselves to make ends meet in Iran. And the article went in great detail about the numbers, about like how a lot of these women are educated, about who they sell themselves to. I read another report about human trafficking in Iraq, where all types of women go to clergy or older men, and the way they sell themselves is in temporary marriages. It's not even zawaj mut'a necessarily, because it's Sunni and Shi'i. Zawaj misyar, but it is so rampant that there are tons of families that survive from the money that I know that the country I came from, Egypt, today, not just prostitution in Egypt, is so rampant, but that many Egyptians go to the Emirat and become prostitutes in the Emirat and support entire families. And everyone knows that the women, Egyptian women who go to the Emirat, know why they go to the Emirat. And, it's the ultimate hypocrisy. Everyone knows and everyone pretends it's not there. Now, to me, that's the violation of hududullah. When Allah comes and says, yatama, orphans, and we ignore orphans the way we do, and Allah says women, and instead of women being honored and protected, they are prostituted in Iran, prostituted in Iraq, prostituted in Egypt, and everyone just pretends that, oh no, hududullah is whether she gets half or... What is this? I mean, and the sad thing is that in a country like Egypt, when Sisi's government, at one point Sisi's government, said, oh, let's let women inherit exactly like men. Personally, I am opposed to it, not because I am opposed to the moral fulfillment of the purpose of the law, but because when it comes from Sisi's government, it's like the devil implementing reforms. And that's the problem, that we can't think, is that we don't want any changes in Quranic laws, or what we call Quranic laws, because we know that these changes mean a retreat of Islam in general in society. Sisi's government, like Assad's government, has secularized so many things, has banned Islamists from appearing on TV, and gives license to everyone who trashes Islam to be on TV 24 hours a day, night and day. And so, of course, you come and say, you are going to institute a reform? No thanks. I don't want anything from you. But if we control our destiny and we become true students of the Quran, not trapped into the dynamics of dictators, whether MBS or MBZ or Sisi or whoever, then we can think of what hududullah is. And hududullah are the what Allah calls upon us to honor and to protect. And first and foremost in Surah Al Nisa are women and orphans. So, I heard there's an Egyptian orphan who went on YouTube, and he was explaining how so many of his fellow orphans perish, like as he was growing up, that so many of the children disappeared or died, and that he thinks that many of the children, the members of the military or the police abducted them and harvested their organs, because they used to be with him and then they disappeared. And that he was lucky enough to grow up, but then in Egyptian society, he says that the state didn't get them a job, and that as an orphan, it's very difficult to get a job, because when you apply for jobs, the first thing they ask you is, who are your parents? And if they find that you're an orphan, most people in Egyptian society don't want to hire you. And how orphans only marry other orphans, because most people in Egyptian society don't want to marry their daughters to an orphan. And I'm sitting listening to this, and I'm thinking, where are hududullah? Where? So it drives me nuts when someone will do epileptic fits because of the half share of a sister and brother, but not at all be troubled by the fact that Muslim women are being prostituted up and down from Iran to Iraq to Egypt, because of the number of Syrian women that have been trafficked, not even bothered by it, or not even bothered by the reality of orphans in Muslim societies. And I just say, it's like you need to go back to the factory. You need to be reconstituted, remade. A lot of us Muslims, we need to be reconstituted, because we really missed the mark. We're completely missing everything.
This is actually good, a lead into the next question, which is, how could we use the precedents in Surah Al Nisa for other marginalized communities in our society, like children with developmental disabilities? Verse 5 speaks to the treatment of sufaha and commands we speak to them kindly. The word ma'ruf has various meanings and seems to vary according to time and place. Could qawlan ma'rufa be understood as more than kind speech in this context, and how does ma'ruf change with context, and how does it differ from ihsan?
For ihsan, because the question raises the issue of ma'ruf and ihsan. But to simplify, I mean, these could be maybe, we can, because it is worthy, like to have an entire lecture series on ihsan, for instance, or the ethical concepts of the Quran. But ihsan is it's ultimate virtue in and of itself, that is not socially defined. It is a good in and of itself, while ma'ruf, it is what is socially, what becomes good because of the social dynamics. So, for instance, when Allah says to speak to them, قولوا قولا معروفا, that when you, to speak in fulfillment of the obligation of ma'ruf, there are forms of speech, whether the things you say, whether they're kind or unkind, insulting or not insulting, absolutely depends on the social circumstance that you grow up in. I mean, any of us, that when you think of the extent to which you are all social animals, you can think of examples of speech that its kindness or lack thereof is defined within the context of usage. Ihsan is different. Ihsan is when Allah says وَأَحْسِنُوا, Allah is not talking about a social practice, but a sense of goodness that fulfills the scales of justice in and of itself. But to the question that you've raised, Surah Al Nisa, every relationship of istidaf, every relationship of istidaf is targeted by Surah Al Nisa. Now, categories of the vulnerable, whether human or not human, because there are animals that are vulnerable. What Surah Al Nisa teaches us is that Allah, if it put it in different, that we are mustakhlafina fil ard, that we know those from Surah Al-Baqarah and so on. That, of course, the Quran is cumulative. You know, each surah builds upon what has been taught before. That we are Allah's khulafa on this earth. We are entitled to dignity. And we are entitled to everything that makes us qa'imin bishahada, to bear witness. Now, someone who is taught to lie cannot bear witness. Someone who is taught to be a hypocrite cannot bear witness. Someone who is taught to be cowardly cannot bear witness. Someone who is taught to be ignorant cannot bear witness. Everything that is needed, that is required to us to perform our obligation of shahada lillah, which means health, education, and everything else. Because how can you bear witness if you've learned to be a coward? How can you bear witness if you learn to be a hypocrite? How can you bear witness if you've not learned to value the truth? How can you bear witness if you're not educated? Because look at the difference between the way educated people stand up for their rights, and uneducated people don't stand up for their rights in the modern age. Why? Because the progress of human history has created a huge disparity between those who are illiterate and those who are literate. Once upon a time, the number of literate people was so small that it didn't create. There wasn't that outrageous disparity between groups. But today, the nature of human progress and technology is that, yeah, there is a huge difference between literate and illiterate. So, every dynamic of istidaf. So, look at how naturally Muslims, when they looked at ma malakat aymanukum, and then Muslim jurists look at the type of how the type of Quranically influenced personality that looks at ma malakat aymanukum and says very with absolute confidence, well, this includes any animals because all animals are at our care and Allah what that type of confidence, that type of moral insight is lacking lacking with modern Muslims. The difference is the modern Muslim is a human being that doesn't fully realize their own dignity because of all the historical circumstances. But every relationship of istidaf is targeted by Surah Al Nisa. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even this is a lot of Muslims, you know, the class of Muslims these nowadays that have, I don't know what the heck motivates them. I don't know what their, you know, what, Allah only knows what is in their hearts. But they out to prove that, you know, slavery was okay, Islam was okay with slavery and so on. When Allah in Surah Al Nisa says, no, sorry, this is Surah Al Ma'idah. Is it Al Ma'idah? Says that sadaqat, sets out who deserves the sadaqat. I'm blanking out right now. Which surah is it? Is it the one that about zakat that we had a fight about? Remember
One
this?
that we had.
You remember the ones who the categories for people who receive zakat?
Oh, it's the Tawbah.
Oh, Tawbah, Surah Al-Tawbah, yeah. In Surah Al-Tawbah, when Allah says that sadaqat are to free enslaved people, that is enough. That in itself is enough to tell you everything you need to know about slavery and Islam. Because Allah is saying your zakah goes to feed the poor, goes to serve Allah fi sabilillah, but equates fi sabilillah, feeding the poor or taking care of the poor and freeing slaves, equates these to in God's cause. So if we are collecting zakah, we are obligated to buy the freedom of every last person who remains in slavery using zakat money. This is the way Quranic trajectory works. It boggles my mind that Allah can tell us that your sadaqah, your zakah must be dedicated to fakr raqabah, to liberating those who are enslaved. And then you still have Muslims that sit there and say, well, no, you know, this issue in slavery and that issue. What's wrong with you? You know, what type of demon haunts you? Recently, someone published a book about Islam and blackness, and then they say that when the Quran talks about uswaddat wujuh, that faces will be blackened in the hereafter, that somehow this is either racist or encourages racism. It is because you don't notice that the people we call black people are not actually black. There are no black human beings. So you're imposing iswaddat wujuh. Our Quranic education needs a whole revamping. It's really extremely frustrating. I mean, it is your own racist assumptions that makes you think that black faces are equal to brown people who are not black. There are no black human beings. But anyway.
Thank you. Black is in light, darkness. It's not.
It's a completely different usage. It's not. It's what the true meaning that light versus darkness it has nothing to do with skin tone.
color.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's this whole class. It's the same class of Muslim type that try to defend the Muslim ban as. It is just this type of Islam that doesn't care about ethics. Islam that is happy to flout ethics as if there is an Islam without ethics. If there are no ethics, there is no Islam.
Okay, and next question. In the first halakha, you mentioned that the rules on polygamy should be left to the discretion of the state or community. For example, the rules can change in different times and places, and not up to individual discretion. In the second halakha, you mentioned polygamy should be discouraged unless it is to take care of orphans. Could you clarify and also explain how do we understand the polygamy issue in light of the practice of the companions? And also, even if polygamy is not strictly outlawed, can verse 129 be read as outlawing polygamy in a moral or spiritual sense? I have trouble understanding how this verse can coexist with the idea of polygamy being necessary even in a specific context.
I can't. Verse 129. Which one is this? Oh. The challenge that I have is the text of the Quran, on the one hand, is clear that it mentions yatama and orphans. And the text itself, in immoral, perhaps legal sense, that part, whether that ethical decision belongs to society at large or belongs to the individual, that polygamy might become necessary to take care of orphans. And clearly Allah cautions us that if you risk or if you are going to be unfair in treating multiple wives fawahida, then just now, of course, the question of whether that decision should be left to, because it's not just left to the husband, but left to the autonomous determination of those engaged in the process. So, man and woman, that a woman decides to be married to more, or women decide to be married to a man that has another wife, or whether it belongs to a collectivity that says, well, now there's a social need for it, is something that I'm not sure about, and I could be persuaded either way. I mean, I can see a very good argument that it's that society at large has or the other way, that it should be left. But what I know is that Allah warns those who engage in polygamy to be very cautious, lest they end up committing an injustice, which can easily be committed, because Allah warns us that justice is now. Of course, you mentioned, what is 119?
129.
Oh, 129. Yeah. Now, but notice that 129 says that you are not going to be able to be fair. So don't incline, don't don't exacerbate the injustice. Don't incline fully towards one, so you leave the other kal mu'allaqa, as if that doesn't sound to me like a prohibition. It sounds to me like a moral warning that you are committing a grievous sin if, through the dynamic of polygamy, you end up with one spouse feeling like she's ignored in the relationship, or she is mu'allaqa, as we, what is the word?
Suspense, state of suspense.
State of suspense.
No, not like as if she's been abandoned. As if she's been abandoned in the relationship. I mean, if we had an honest Muslim space, like what would if I had a dream world, right? And the Usuli Institute had a lot of funds, I would start a very honest conversation now about polygamy, in which, and I wouldn't be interested in those who are going to come and tell me, dogma about either for or against, but serious critical thinkers. And the testimony and the thinking of women is very critical here, because I don't know what institutions of polygamy ultimately, whether they, as some claim, degrade the value of women in society at large. Because I could be completely convinced that no, polygamy should only be allowed in very limited circumstances if, in fact, I find through the actual agency of women, like women had agency at the time of the Prophet, like at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they actually express their concerns. They become the agents expressing their own concerns. Similarly, here, when all is said and done, women exercising their agency make a convincing case that polygamy cheapens women at large in society. My position on polygamy would change 180 degrees or 360 degrees or whatever. 100, what is it? 180?
Could be either.
Yeah. From my perspective in this society, every time I've been tempted to be a sworn enemy of polygamy, I see what a lot of men who do not engage in any type of polygamy do engage in, and the number of men who end up cheating on their wives. And I ache for an honest. So what I was saying, if Usuli had money, I would create, a series of conferences where you invite the best Muslim minds, men and women, to come and have in a with an absolute prohibition on rhetoric and dogma and but an honest, rational discussion on whether, in fact, and whether this should be left to each society to decide, to determine by itself whether generalized fatwa within the science of usul al-fiqh is permissible in an issue of this, or is it just what is permissible are localized fatwa, whether if polygamy is in itself a symptom of how we are failing women, because when I look at so many Muslim societies today, I, we are not just failing women. We are. I mean, how do you accept the amount of human trafficking and prostitution that has exploded in Muslim societies in recent times? Is polygamy necessary to try to solve a problem like this, or is this naive? I don't know. I really don't know what the answer is. How do we address something like what we see in Iran or Iraq or Egypt, the shocking number of people that are basically forced into sexual exploitation? I don't know. I know I didn't give other than one of the Hassan Farhan al-Maki. One of the things he always says in his talks, which I really made me fall in love with this man, is that he keeps saying this matter needs further research. I wish we as Muslims we would say that all the time. Further research. To pretend that we know what we don't know is remarkably arrogant. What I'm sure about in life, other than my relationship with Allah, maybe 5% of matters. 95%, I'm just offering opinions. And I could be persuaded otherwise. The only thing that I am absolutely sure of is my relationship with my Maker. That is beyond. That doesn't require research, but nearly everything else in my existence needs further research.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so now we've crossed the 10 o'clock mark, and so we still have a number of questions. So I'm going to just combine some questions.
I'll try to give shorter answers. I know.
These are really good questions, and it's hard not to do that.
People, if anyone hears this, more people should join us in Taraweeh. No, we get the faithful and trusty people, that maybe like 2-3 people that join us in Taraweeh, but
not everybody's in our time zones. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's true. People are in different time zones, but people who pray together,
Okay, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, but it's an important question. Number one, you mentioned that warfare must only be done if it's for just purposes. How should we understand the conquests taken during Umar's caliphate? What purposes were they fulfilling? Follow-up question, if there is a compulsory draft and we know the U.S. is engaged in unjust wars, what should a Muslim who is forcibly drafted do? And then question two, as it has become more and more clear that Islamophobia and white supremacy is a disease in the world, even among Muslims themselves, on day 7 the Sheikh mentioned a jihad against Islamophobia, and I wonder what that requires of us as Muslims. I've been having a hard time reconciling the reality that my very quote-unquote survival is conditioned on supporting those that are actively maligning our religion. The ones God God warns us of in many ayahs in the Quran, including in Surah Al Nisa, ayahs 88 through 94. For a practical example, our tax dollars are funding colonial violence, oppression, racism, and so many other oppressive and unjust acts upon Muslims every minute of every day, and countless other injustices waged in the name of our safety and security. Perhaps decades ago, when we did not have the information we know now and the attacks on Islam were not so clear, but how can we now, in good consciousness, give ourselves the license to support those who dehumanize and dominate us? Are we the disempowered with no choice? Is this a weakness in our morality? And may Allah reward you for
Okay.
sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Okay, let's take first the issue of the draft and so on. I'll be painfully honest. If I was to serve in the American military, where I would be bombing Iraqis and Afghanis and Somalis, or no, I go to prison rather than kill an innocent soul. And I mean, I'm shocked at how many Muslims I encounter that have jobs that basically serve the weapons industry, or they're proud that they serve in. It's fine to be proud to serve your country. I mean, that's, but not when your country is involved in an unjust aggression, act of aggression. It is our nothing about our invasion of Afghanistan or invasion of Iraq was just. These were blatant acts of injustice. The way that we kill people in these extrajudicial killings that we call targeted strikes, without due process, without we don't even bother trying to capture people that we claim are outlaws and bring them to stand trial. We just kill them, which is just it's unfortunately Israel was the one that was doing this, and then it moved from Israel to the United States, and it's as if our association with Israel has taught us, which is acts that are not considered. It's a violation of international law, a violation of ethical law, and a violation of Islamic law. And so, I think it's pretty clear if that, and that's why people like Muhammad Ali went to prison. But this, if you love your children and you don't want your children to be put in a situation where either they serve in an unjust war or they go to prison, as a Muslim, it is incumbent upon you to try to, you are a citizen of this country, to try to make a difference in the policy determinations and decisions of this country. Because if you don't, then this country is going to do things that will put your children in impossible situations. It is incumbent upon us. I mean, listen, I don't think people realize how easy it is to gain political clout in this country. And all you need to do is spend. And I know some Muslims who are so filthy rich, they can gain a great deal of political power if they spend their money in the service of Islamic causes. But they don't. They just, it's. I mean, I've been in LA, I've been to some unbelievable mansions owned by Muslims. And every time I've been invited to one of these mansions, I'm like standing there and I look at the marble that has been imported from, I don't know, Italy and all of that, and look at these mansions that look like, as if they come out of a movie, and I wonder to myself, like, and these are people who are usually the chair of the board, or on the board of Islamic centers and so on. And it's like, what? I can't process it. I can't process. I would understand if you had this wealth and at the same time you spent a great deal in. So you. But usually these are also the individuals who are extremely stingy when it comes to spending on anything that is Islamic. Anyway, so that's a military thing. The other thing is that, listen, the wars fought by the Sahaba in early Islam, we have to understand the historical reality was this was an age before anything like the United Nations, anything like the League of Nations. The laws of war were synonymous with the laws of conquest back then, meaning that the assumption was the right to conquest. That was the law at the time. There is a standing right to conquest unless there is a treaty between yourself and your neighbor. It was the law at the time was the war of all against all. So there is the birth of the Muslim Ummah in Arabia. Again, if Muslims wrote their own history, things would be different. But before the birth of Islam, what the Persian Empire and what the Byzantine Empire had grown accustomed to, people forget that the Byzantine Empire in Egypt was not in a friendly occupation of Egypt. They were persecuting the Coptic Church. The head of the Coptic Church had gone into exile. The head of the Coptic Church only entered Egypt when the Muslim armies conquered Egypt, by the way. He was hiding in some areas in the Sham. And the Byzantine Empire in Egypt, when you read some of the accounts of, for instance, and I kid you not, you read in some of the Egyptian pre-Islamic accounts how Roman soldiers would come, order the men of a household out, have them wait outside, and they go in, rape the women, get done and finished, and then they tell them, okay, we're done. So the Roman, especially during the rise of Islam, it was not a benign, friendly occupation of Egypt, or this is all what colonial Orientalism, sort of just passed over the complexity and the ups and downs of the Byzantine presence in places like Asham and in Egypt and the Persian. Now, both the Persians and the Byzantines collected a tax, collected a jizya from the Arab tribes that were close to Byzantia and the Arab tribes that were close to Persia. They left the Arabs in the heart of Arabia alone as long as these Arabs were disunited, constantly feuding with one another, and largely uninteresting. When the Persians and the Byzantines realized that now these people of the desert have gotten together and that tribes along the Persian Empire and tribes along the Byzantine Empire informed their masters, we are no longer going to pay the jizya because now we've become Muslim, the laws of conquest meant that it is only a matter of time before either the Byzantines completely conquer you and enslave you, or you have to sign an extremely humiliating treaty with them, or the Persians conquer you. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. What they understood is that you either conquer or be conquered. To sit here, I mean, the intellectual dishonesty, especially among some of the so-called liberal Muslims that come now, and they're very disingenuous and very ahistorical and very ignorant of, and they sit there and they try to apologize for the Islamic ghazawat. What is this? Does anyone say to the Christian church, apologize for the Byzantine occupation of Egypt and Syria and Libya and Tunis and Morocco? No one in their right mind would think of saying that. No one in their right mind. Why? Because this was a completely different. So no one goes to the existing church of Byzantium and say, "Oh, apologize for all these Christian invasions and all the people all the people that the Christians killed in these countries." People have the historical sophistication to understand that that was a time, and this is now a very different time, very different laws. So the Islamic conquests, I'm not saying that all of them, that I agree with every single Umayyad conquest, but there were absolutely conquests that were conquests of survival and conquests of liberation. The Syrian people welcomed the Islamic army, the Shami people welcomed the Islamic army because they saw them as fellow Easterners coming to liberate them. There was a reason why all these people converted to Islam so quickly. If they were happy with Byzantine hegemony or Persian hegemony, they wouldn't have converted to Islam en masse. I mean, we don't even have narratives of forcible or coercive conversion. I mean, in a country like Egypt, the majority was non-Muslim, or the majority was Christian for 4 centuries after Islam conquered after the liberating Egypt from Byzantine Empire. So when people say that it was pushing back the entitlements of dominant superpowers that had been superpowers for centuries and had gotten accustomed to exploiting people without any reservation, and the Muslims at the time were seen as liberators, as people who were coming in and basically saying, now no one is going to enter your homes and rape your women. Now no one is going to impose these extremely oppressive taxes that the Byzantines imposed on Egyptian agriculture. They restored the rights of the Coptic Church and brought back the Coptic Pope to Egypt. They allowed all types of Christian factions that were outlawed under the Byzantine Empire to be represented in Jerusalem and to open up their churches in Palestine. Pay attention to the micro-history and a realistic reading of the history. Did then, during the Umayyad Empire, some of these conquests become excessive? It was no longer liberating the people of the East who had been under the dominance of Byzantians for a very long time, for centuries. Did it move from that to wars of aggression against people who didn't want Muslims to liberate them? Absolutely. There were such battles. But these battles didn't take place till quite late in the Umayyad era. But a real historian would talk to you about battle by battle. A real historian would say, "Oh yeah, this battle, this was What we know about the people that were this battle fought to push Roman authority, the people in this area felt liberated. While in this battle, the people in this area didn't want Muslims and felt oppressed by Muslims because they didn't welcome Muslims at all. That's a real historian. That's real history. Not the type of Orientalist garbage that, especially these Muslims who just want to, are so eager to just trash their own tradition, to prove that they're ethical and they're moral and they're human. And but it's not good history. It's not good history. What was the last one?
Okay, about jihad and Islam against Islamophobia,
Oh,
tax dollars,
yeah.
funding colonial violence, racism.
We are in a predicament. Okay. So I don't want to. Yeah, I feel absolutely tax dollars is going to goes to it is spent in ways that are often immoral, but the way that the Egyptian government spends taxes or the Saudi government is no less immoral. So the plight is, as a Muslim in the modern age, I don't know where to exist to be moral. I know that I would like to see immoral moral spending of resources. Well, either as a Muslim, either I can choose to go back home and go back to Egypt, let's say, and work to change the Egyptian reality so that Egypt will become more moral, or I remain here and choose to try to change this reality so that it becomes more moral. My own experience in life has shown me that in Egypt, I wouldn't survive 30 days. The minute I start saying things that the government doesn't like, it's very easy. They'll just take me and you disappear and they do with you whatever they want. And unfortunately, what I'm saying about Egypt applies to so many Muslim countries. So the worst of possibilities, or the best of the worst of possibilities, is that I try to change here, things here, at least where I'm not going to, at least, unless I become extremely influential, and then, the government can try to assassinate you like they did with Malcolm X, or make you disappear, or whatever. That's possible. But the moral options, but I'm always cognizant. That's why I can't just, live my life blissfully ignorant of things, because I'm constantly thinking that as a Muslim in this country, I have moral obligations. Every time my country acts in an immoral fashion, every time my country kills innocent people or supports despots, or backs up the most corrupt, vile, disgusting rulers, I feel a direct sense of responsibility. When I spoke at the American Muslim Bar Association, the
National Muslim Law Student Association.
National Muslim Law Student Association, they invited me to give a keynote. And I don't know, I hope I'm wrong, but in my keynote, I was trying to tell them, listen, guys, you can't just be lawyers who are ambulance chasers, go and work in personal injury law firms, or go work in employment discrimination law firms, or go whatever law firms, or transactional, where you're basically making money and then you live and die as if you're nothing. As a Muslim, if you want to actually live as a Muslim, you have an obligation to change the injustice that plagues your country. Many of these kids don't have another citizenship. I mean, I don't have another citizenship. I gave up Egyptian citizenship a long time ago. But you can't live as a Muslim and just be blissfully ignorant of what your country does to the rest of the world. My keynote didn't go well. I mean, I just felt like they just didn't. I don't know.
That's the waswas. It was great.
I felt like, you know, they were looking at me like, who's this old guy who's coming telling us to not make money and, you know, stuff like that. You know. Make your life count. You're under an absolute obligation. I mean, I'm always tempted. Grace can tell you that I'm always tempted to take my retirement money, buy some place somewhere completely isolated, you know, in some island somewhere away from all civilization. Grace always wants CVS to be around because I take so much medicine. But so, okay, I have that limitation. It has to be a place where there's CVS. But anyway, an island where, you know, and I, no email, no phones, no anything. But I know that I would be very happy because then I can live with my books and no one would bother me. But I know that Allah wouldn't be happy with me. And that's the thing, is that Allah is constantly saying, what are you doing with your intellect? What are you doing with your health? What are you doing with the money? You know, everything that I've given you. What are you doing with it? Because if I can't justify myself, and time is running out, you know, before I know it, I will be dead. It's just that's a reality. All of us will. And then I need to be able to say a meaningful thing to my Maker, to justify everything that my Maker has given me. At least my very best efforts. You know, I wasn't able to change much, but I tried. I tried to my very last breath. Maybe if we have this type of attitude, maybe we can start making a difference in this country. Maybe we can get our country to be more fair and more just and less colonial and less exploitative. And, you know.
Inshallah, that's a perfect place to end. Thank you. Sorry to everyone who submitted questions and we didn't get to it. Maybe we'll have an opportunity in the future. You know, our focus is obviously to get through the tafsir. So, you know, towards the end of the project, we'll definitely have more Q&As and perhaps we can address some of these.
Can you believe there's going to be, inshallah, a new ayah, a
Inshallah,
new surah?
Next week, a new surah. Cannot wait. And so we're just waiting to see what it may be, inshallah. But thank you everyone for being with us. We have Taraweeh tonight. It will be on YouTube, so make sure that you. We have to now go have dinner, and poor Sheikh has not eaten dinner yet, so we'll have dinner quickly, and then you know, we'll see you online, inshallah. Just look for the notification. It's only on YouTube, so we don't have any other way to do that. Someone asked that question, and what else?
May Allah bless you all and accept your fasting.
Inshallah.
Are any of you still fasting, or is it in your time zone?
Oh, okay.
Oh, he's fasting.
They're on the West Coast, so.
Oh, Elena's fasting. Is it? What?
It's because they're in a different time zone. They're in California. They're 3 hours behind us.
So what time is it, California?
7:30.
7:30. They're close.
Oh, haram. So you're listening to all of this with fasting brain. Oh, my apologies. Okay.
Well,
May
inshallah.
Allah reward you. May Allah reward you.
Inshallah, and have a wonderful week. And inshallah, we will see you next week. Friday for the khutbah and Saturday for the next halaqah, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum. Have a wonderful night.